Alrighty, so as we've seen in the previous videos, you can use most of these ES2015 features inside of Node. In fact, I probably should have done this in the last video, but I'm going to scroll all the way to the right here. I'm sorry my resolution is so low. Under servers and runtimes, you see that Node.js has a 54% implementation of ES2015 with all these features. Primarily all the ones we're going to be talking about in this series, or in this section, are applicable to Node.js. And so we've never had to worry about whether or not these features are supported because we have more control over our server environment than we do the client environment. So what happens when we want to use ES2015 in the browser? So what we're going to do is we're going to use something called a transpiler. And a transpiler takes source code from one high-level language and compiles it, or transpiles it, into source code in another high-level language, or the same high-level language. So for example, you could call less a transpiler. It compiles from it compiles from less to CSS. And in the case here, we want a transpiler that'll go from JavaScript to JavaScript, but a JavaScript at an ECMAScript version that is higher than the one that our clients might necessarily have implemented. Now, the one that we're going to be using is Babel. So you see right here is we have Babel plus core.js. So if you're interested in what features you can use in Babel, you can look at that awesome spreadsheet there. And don't worry about core.js. Core.js is a polyfill. We'll talk about that in a later video in this section. So we're going to be using Babel and core.js, and that's one of the most popular transpilers for JavaScript today. So I guess let's go ahead and talk about what Babel exactly is. So I'm going to hop over to babel.js.io, and we can see it says Babel is JavaScript compiler, use the next generation JavaScript today, and basically, like I said, it'll take newer code in JavaScript and compile it in a way, or transpile it in a way that can be executed on your browser, and you don't have to worry about browser incompatibilities. It's really the only legitimate way to use next generation or current generation JavaScript in a web environment, because you know how people are with the versions of the browsers they're using, and you know how some browsers support some features and some browsers don't support them, and blah blah blah. Babel takes care of that for us. Babel in and of itself is really just kind of a framework for performing transformations in JavaScript. You actually have to go in and add plugins into Babel to get specific transformations. So in addition to Babel, we're also going to have to grab the ES2015 transformation, but we'll talk about that when we install it later. The first thing I want to do is actually get Babel installed and executing. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to hop over here into a command line window that I have in an empty directory. So if you're wanting to follow along, go ahead and create a new directory and pop in there with your command line or your terminal. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to just go ahead and npm init this. Babel example, blah, 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 blah. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and install Babel by, not surprisingly, npm install Babel. And I'm going to say -- save dev. And the reason I'm doing that is because Babel is not going to be required to actually run our execution or run our code. It's only going to be required for building our application. So again, even if you're not using Node.js, if you're using ASP.NET or Ruby or PHP or whatever, you definitely want to do save dev because you don't really have any runtime dependencies in the first place. So anyway, I'll go ahead and hit enter. And you'll notice it installs very quickly. It's very small, actually. And so let's poke around with it for a second. Maybe the first instinct you would have is think, okay, so Babel, probably like the less compiler, has a command line tool that we can execute from within our Node modules. And you'd be sort of right. So let's go ahead and just poke around real fast. I'm going to do node modules / .bin. Remember, the .bin folder is where command line utilities of packages we've installed get placed or aliased at. And I'll just type in, I'll just take a stab in the dark and type in Babel. And I'm going to hit enter. Now you notice that you'll get a message saying the CLI has been moved into the package Babel CLI. So I'm trying to make a big point of this, that if you want to execute Babel, you're going to have to also install the Babel CLI. Now, it's giving us an example command right here, npm install -g Babel CLI. However, I really do not recommend you install the Babel CLI globally in your system. Babel is in version 6 right now, and it has it seems to get a new major version fairly regularly, and we want to be able to have our Babel installation, our runtime, our transformations, and our CLI local to the project. We do not want to install this globally. So how do we install this locally? Well, just go ahead and type in npm install babel CLI and then save dev and hit enter. Now, you'll notice that this project is slightly bigger than the Babel core, so this might take a second to install. But I have the power of the pause button, so you guys didn't have to watch all of that. Anyway, as you see, there are 1.5 million dependencies that Babel CLI requires. Another good reason to save this in your dev dependencies as opposed to your runtime dependencies, because you don't want to pull this huge package along with you when you deploy your application. But anyway, you can ignore those errors. They probably a bug somewhere. In my experience, this error in particular has not caused any issues, so don't worry about that. But anyway, so now what we can do is we can do node modules. Oops, node modules. Bin, and we can type in Babel and hit enter. And now we're going to see the CLI. Well, no, we're not, because it went into a interactive mode. If we do -- help, we will now see all the options we can throw into it. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and, since I don't want to have to type in this command all the time to compile our application or to compile our code, I'm going to go ahead and create a quick little project here. And this is going to be the base project that we're going to be using for the rest of this section. So I'm going to pop open code in the current directory here. And decided to pop up on playing monitor roulette here. Decided to pop up over there. And so now we have code open. And what I want to do is I want to create a basic folder structure here. So it's going to be a very common folder structure. I'm going to create a new folder, and I'm going to call it public. And inside public, I'm going to create scripts. Now, public is going to be the directory that we're going to serve out on our web server. And scripts is going to be the subdirectory that's going to contain all of our individual scripts that have been processed by Babel. So this is the output directory of our transpiled scripts. Then I'm going to create another folder that is going to be a sibling of public, and I'm going to call it scripts. And this is where, well, I can call it, just to make things really easy to read over here, I'll call it source scripts. In an actual production environment, I would call this scripts, but just to make it not confusing between this scripts folder, which is our public scripts folder, and our source scripts folder, I'll just change the name on that. Next up, I'm going to go ahead and pull down jQuery. We're going to use jQuery in a couple of these examples, and so I want that to be installed and available to us while we're working. So to do that, I'm going to create a bower.rc file, or there you go. I'm going to create a bower.rc file, and in bower.rc, I'm going to go ahead and give it a directory of public/vendor. So the vendor directory is where our Bower dependencies are going to be placed under this public directory so that we can access them through our web browser. So then I'm going to go ahead and do a Bower init. And inside of this, I'm just going to accept all the defaults. I don't really care. Blah, 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 blah. And after I did that Bower init, we now have a bower.json file next to our bower.bower.rc file. And I'm just going to go ahead and say bower install jQuery save, just to get this out of the way. Again, I want to be able to use jQuery in our examples, and I don't want to have to install it every time it comes up. So now inside of our vendor folder, we have the jQuery folder with its distribution folder. So there's our installation of jQuery. Again, I highly recommend using Bower for pulling down simple little things like jQuery or Moment or whatever if you're not using a module loader. If you are using a module loader, it gets more complicated, but we're going to be talking about that later. All right, so we have our basic structure set up here for the rest of the examples in this section. I'm going to right-click Source Scripts, and I'll just create a script. I'll just create this as o1 example.js. So now, remember, our public directory is what the web server is going to be serving. We won't have access to o1 example.js, but I want Babel to transpile it and compile it into a ECMA version that will work well with our browser. And then I want it to dump it into the scripts folder. So to do that, I'm going to create an npm script. So I'm going to come over here to Package.json, And inside of my scripts, I'm going to create a simple npm script that we can execute from the command line. So remember, these are just little shell command line or shell snippets that have access to the .bin directory. And it's simply going to be Babel. And then I'm going to follow it with the a path to a folder. In this case, src-script. So I'm telling Babel, go ahead and compile or transpile all of the scripts found in src scripts. Whoops, I forgot to give the script a name. I have the dumb. I'm just going to call it scripts. So be sure to give your script a name. And the actual command is going to be Babel source scripts as the directory. And I am also going to do -- source maps inline. So if you're interested, you can go ahead and execute the Babel script with the help flag and read about that, read about the different options you have with source maps, but I'm going to use the inline option, so the source maps are compiled into the individual files. And then I'm going to say -- outdir, and I'm going to pass in public / scripts. So public scripts is where I want it to dump whatever scripts it finds inside of source scripts. So let's go ahead and test that out. Let's see if it's actually processing our file. Now, the file is empty, but it should still process it and copy it over. So to execute this script, I'm just going to do npm run scripts and hit enter. And we see it successfully compiled. We also see right here, this is output from Babel itself. It is saying, okay, you told me to look in this folder, and I did. I found this script, and then I processed it and dumped it into this folder. So now if we come back here into public, we now have o1example.js here. Okay, so let's go ahead and talk about another feature of Babel that we're going to be taking massive advantage of, and that is watching. So if we pass in a -- watch flag into Babel, what it'll do is it'll sit here and it'll run in our command line, but every time it detects that our source script has changed, it'll recompile that and dump it back into this scripts folder. So before I show you guys what that'll look like, let's just go ahead and write the command, because the command is really simple. I'm going to jump back into Package.json, and I'm going to write another npm script, and it's just going to be scripts -- watch. And it's just going to be Babel, source scripts for the input. Then I'm going to pass in watch, -- watch. That's really the only change here. And then I'm going to follow it up with source maps inline, and then outdir public scripts. So now when we execute scripts watch, it's going to go ahead and sit there open and running, and it'll continuously compile whatever scripts are inside of this folder. So let's go ahead and see that in action. I'm going to type in npm run scripts -- watch. And I'll go ahead and, if you guys want to pause this right now, you can take a look at that command. But otherwise, hopping back over here, we notice that the same output happened. It did compile our script, but notice how we're still running the command. So if I come over here into our source scripts example.js and I say console log hello world, and I hit save, Control-S, notice how immediately Babel went off and recompiled it. And we can verify that by, I'm going to do a split window here, and I'm going to open up the compiled file to the right and the uncompiled file to the left. So if I come here to the left and do var ble = 10 and hit Control-S, notice how it immediately appears here on the right. This is how we're going to do most of the examples in this section, so you guys can see, kind of get a feel for how these ECMAScript 2015 features are able to be ran in a older environment. It's a really great debugging feature. It's a really great learning feature to see side by side how our code is being compiled. So we have two more things to fix here. The first thing is it's currently not doing any transformations. So let's just throw in some ECMAScript 6 code in here. This is something I'm going to be discussing in the next video, but just take it for granted. Just don't care what the let keyword does yet. And I'm just going to say let woe = 20. And I'm going to hit Control-S. Now, the let keyword is used to declare variables in a particular way, is not supported in versions before ECMA or ES2015. So over here, you'll notice Babel is not performing any transformation on this line of code. It has no idea what let is. We haven't told Babel anything about ES2015 at all. So far, Babel is just taking what we give it and printing it back out. We have to tell it what transformations we want it to do. Now, not surprisingly, these transformations come in the form of npm packages. And you can find out which ones are officially supported by heading over to the Babel website and clicking on the Plugins tab. And you'll see presets. We'll talk about presets in a second. But if you scroll down, you'll see the syntax plugins. So we have things like do expressions or exponential operator, and so on. And if you scroll down further, we'll see many of the features that we're going to be talking about in this section all listed down here with classes and for of and all that fun stuff. So these are individual packages that if we added into our project, Babel will then start understanding that specific feature. So it's very, very modular. However, it would be it'd just be a really miserable time to include each one of these individually. So they do what are called presets. And if I scroll up, these presets are basically packages of plugins. And fortunately, we have this ES2015 preset right here. And if I click on it, you'll notice it includes all of those ES2015 features right there. And if we go back, we also have stage 0, 1, 2, and 3. We talked about what those meant in the previous video. So for example, if we went to stage 3, we'll see that they have a transformation for a sync, which is a stage 3 proposal. However, it's not part of ES2015, so we're not going to be discussing it. Okay, so we have two steps here. We first need to go ahead and download this entire bundle, or preset rather, and then we need to go ahead and tell Babel to use that preset. So for step 1, it's pretty straightforward. I'm going to come over here and I'm going to hit Control-C to stop this watch task. And I'm going to say npm install, and it's going to be babel-preset-es2015, and then I'm going to do save dev. And then I'll hit enter. And now it's going to go off and it's going to download all of those awesome syntax transformations that we're going to be taking advantage of. So as you can see right here, it's dependent on all of the things that it includes, and it grabbed all those packages for us. But we still have a problem. If I go ahead and say npm run scripts and hit enter, and it does its stuff, notice how this let has not been transformed yet. It's still invalid ES pre-2015 or pre-ES 2015. There's two ways that we can instruct Babel to actually go out and perform the transformations that we want. So I'll go ahead and close these guys out. The first one is we can create a babelrc file. So I can create a new folder or new file and say babelrc.babelrc. And I'm going to change my syntax mode over to JSON because this is a JSON file. So I'm going to hit Control-Shift-P, type in language, hit enter, and change it to JSON. So we'll get JSON syntax highlighting here. And then in this, what I'm going to do is I'm simply going to open up a object, and I'm going to say presets, followed by a colon, followed by an array, and then not surprisingly, ES2015. Then I'll hit Control-S. So we simply have a .babelrc file with this JSON object inside of it that tells it to use the ES2015 preset. And now if I come over here and npm run scripts again, now if I jump over into public scripts example 1, notice how that let got turned into a var, which is the appropriate transformation. Again, we'll talk about let does a whole lot. Let's not as a synonym to var, but in this context, that's how it's going to get compiled into. So I mentioned there's another way to set your Babel properties. So I can come over here and I'm going to delete this babelrc entirely, because the second way to do it is to actually put it into your package.json itself. So I can open up package.json, and I'm going to just add another property. And this property is not a part of the package.json specification, but it is something that's picked up by Babel. So I'm going to open up Babel, and then I'm going to provide an object, and then not surprisingly, this is going to be the same style of object that we had previously. So I'm going to say presets, followed by an array, followed by ES2015. If I come back here and run it again, we get an error, because I did not spell presets correctly. I apparently can't word. And as you see, if we come back here, our thing was Transpile. So yeah, everything's working, and we're ready to get going. So I'll address these errors that we're seeing in Visual Studio Code in the next video, because if you're using Visual Studio Code, you're going to have to do one more step to not get a bunch of nasty errors while you follow along. So in that case, I'll go ahead and I guess we'll see you guys in the next video.